Government officials have frequently expressed concerns lately about how tech companies use personal data. Think back to Mark Zuckerberg's highly watched testimony in front of Congress after the Cambridge Analytica data breach back in April of 2018, and there have been many more privacy hearings on the Hill since then. But as we've learned, the government itself also has an interest in accessing Americans' personal information. It's the subject of a new report by Axios. Sara Fischer is a media reporter for Axios. Sara, thanks for joining us here. How does the government want to use data, and how is that different than how tech companies look to use it?
Yeah, well, tech companies mostly want user data so that they can make money, primarily ad revenue from data-targeted advertising. But governments have a little bit of a different use case. They want to use mass amounts of user data, one, to protect citizens. So if there's a security threat, a national security threat, they can use data to detect it. But two, sometimes it can help them actually solve crimes. This is usually the case with the FBI. We've detailed in the piece several examples in which the FBI wants to work with big tech companies to gather data to help solve some really bad crimes.
And there's been some opposition to that from the tech world. You think back to the San Bernardino shooting, the government and Apple ended up pretty much in a stalemate over opening up an iPhone. Is there interest in working together, or is this pitting tech companies against law enforcement in some cases?
Yeah, you make a really good point there. There are going to be some instances in which tech companies are going to want to play ball. Usually if there's a one-off crime, tech companies are more willing to give over that data because it's not mass surveillance. So encryption is an interesting example. As you mentioned with the San Bernardino case, Apple actually really didn't want to hand over the PIN to open up the user's phone. That case sort of never ended up going anywhere. But there have been other examples where tech companies are a little bit more willing to work with the government in order to make sure that a specific crime is solved or that you can make sure people are protected. So a good example of that might be if there's a major terrorist threat, tech companies have gotten better over the last few years of working with the government to ensure that they know about it. But there are some instances where they're a little bit more reluctant. An example might be we detailed instances in which the FBI wants data from genetics companies like an Ancestry.com or Family DNA, in order to better detect criminals. But, tech companies say, look, our users don't even know that you're getting access to that data. We don't necessarily think that's right.
At the same time, there have been some real notable cold cases that have been closed through the use of the DNA data in some of these websites. So you can see why law enforcement would be interested in that. The other thing the FBI has had an interest in is pulling public data from social media.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And especially in wake of a lot of these mass shootings, I think the FBI thinks that if they can mass surveil data from social media, that they're going to have a better chance at detecting this kind of stuff. So we saw that the FBI publicly posted a position for outside vendors to help them mine this kind of data. And by the way, that's an initiative that's coming straight all the way up from the White House. President Trump, as you know, has been hosting things like social media summits, urging tech companies to work closer with the government to hand over data when they think that there could be a threat. But at the end of the day, Chris, the thing that we have to remember is that users, when they are signing privacy agreements to their accounts on social media or messaging apps, they don't know necessarily that they're going to be handing over their data to government. This is the same thing with those DNA testing sites. And so you can imagine that some people are a little bit skeptical about this. And what privacy experts say is, look, at the end of the day, what we need is a massive public debate about this that we just haven't really had yet.
Are there laws or regulations right now to protect people's data from the government?
Sure, there are plenty. I mean, the most notable thing to understand is that we have historical examples of instances in which the government took over or obtained mass amounts of data and used them for political purposes. We know that specifically in the J. Edgar Hoover era of the FBI. So we do have protections for users to ensure that the government can't just access their data. In fact, it's built into the Bill of Rights with search and seizure. But at the end of the day, what we need to understand is how can we weigh those protections to also ensure public safety? And I think the amount of mass shootings that we've seen recently, where they had posts that were going on social media by the shooters that could have been detected beforehand is making everybody, both the government and users, more open to a more future-looking conversation about how do we balance user interests with privacy.
What are privacy experts saying for people to do if they want to protect their information?
Read your privacy consent agreement. I know that they're very long, but at the end of the day, a lot of these tech companies are switching their privacy agreements so that you can opt out or opt in to have your data be shared with third parties, and that could be including the government. If you are a user who's skeptical about the government or another third party getting your data, privacy experts will say that the best thing you can do is to read your privacy agreement and make sure you're making a decision accordingly.
Sara Fischer, very interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you.